geography of India, considering the entire structure, the way India has been functioning over the years. So it is very important that the big and the small have to coexist. In India, you just can't have big, you can't just, so you have to have the small setups and you have to have the big setups. So big setups are required where you require big kind of lending, big kind of financing, and you require small setups at the rural level, at the urban level, at the township level, at the city level. Only thing is that the banking regulations or the regulation of the banks by the central bank needs to be further strengthened. We are seeing, see what is happening is, I think you people don't realize because you people are still as students, but me as a person who is having a lot of money lying with the banks, you get scared when you talk about, when you hear about the banks having so much of NPAs. If you do the simple economics, you will find that a lot of banks, if you look at their balance sheet and do an analysis, and you see that the amount of NPAs that they are carrying on their books means today if everyone goes to the bank to take their money back, which is lying in the bank as deposits, the bank will not be able to honor it. So what is happening is that because of this, there is huge amount of risk and that is precisely the reason why they have increased the deposit insurance, but again, that doesn't help, because essentially what is happening is when you are putting your money in a bank, what are you doing? The bank is a custodian of your money. What you expect that whenever you need, you can go and just imagine a situation that you go to an ATM and you want to draw 1,000 rupees and the bank gives you a message that sorry, there is no money to give you. So you would never like it, that kind of a situation. You always feel that if your money is lying in the bank, it is your money, you can go and draw at any point of time. And that is precisely is the banking function. So a lot of things has happened, there has been a lot of failures on the part of the auditors, there has been a lot of failures on the part of the regulators, there have been a lot of unprudent lending done by the bank, there have been a lot of fraudulent lending done by the bank. So there has been, it's a combination of so many things because of which we have come to a situation. But anyway, they are trying to rectify the situation. I think it is going to take a lot of time in terms of the banking sector in India to revive and to come. See, today the banks are not very comfortable in doing big lendings because they have very bad past experience. But that is not the solution. Banking is all about taking money from X and giving it to Y as a loan, taking from X as a deposit and giving it to Y as a loan. And then have their margin meet off their expenses and report some profit and give it dividend to the shareholders. So if the banks stop lending, the whole purpose of the banking industry gets defeated. But what is required is that it's like, as a student, you cannot say that you will not write exams. You have to write exams. You cannot wish it away. So you have to prepare for it. That's all. You prepare for the exams and go for the exams. So here the same thing. When you are lending, you prepare for lending, do prudent lending, monitor it regularly. You cannot avoid all bad debts. You cannot avoid all NPAs. There could be genuine NPAs. Like I could be a genuine borrower. I start a business. For whatever reasons, for certain internal factors, external factors, business may fail. I may not be able to repay to the bank. Bank may have taken some exposure. Even after recovering anything from my security, something, bank may end up with a loss.
So currently, sir, here is a very optimistic person. He says that the government is right on track when we talk about the economy at the moment. The tax rate here is requires a lot of optimization, wherein he believes that every corporate should not pay more than 30% and every individual in the country should not pay 20%, so that each one has a lot of personal disposable income. And what the government is not taking into account is, even though the tax slab says that if we have a particular income, we don't have to pay tax, but at the end of the day, everyone is paying indirect tax. And the state of the economy states that the banks require merger. The public sector, the bank that we have, the biggest one, SBI, not currently accepted as a guarantor. That is what is sir's intake. Moving on to Tanisha ma'am, if you could get ma'am's insight on the current economic situation as well. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
I agree with Mr. Joshi in the sense that I too am an optimist, and I think the economic slowdown is a reality that we have to confront. But as far as the broader theme of this panel goes, a $5 trillion economy, I don't know whether we'll be able to meet the target in the timeline set by the government, but I think we eventually will, sooner than later. But I also agree in the sense that more aggressive reforms need to be taken, especially in terms of the federal taxation structure, like he said. I'm not an economist. I come from a political consultancy background. But there's this Australian economist called Schumpeter, who had this theory of creative destruction, which basically entailed dismantling of long-entrenched processes to kind of encourage innovation. And that's what I think our country really needs right now. Even with the last budget, we saw reforms that weren't necessarily as aggressive as they needed to be. And I still feel like there is much that can be done to kind of reach the target in the timeline that has been set if we really want to. So that's my take.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So currently, we still have hopes that we will achieve our target, that is a $5 trillion economy. Moving on to Anand, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your views.
So I think we have a lot of optimists here. I am one of them as well. So yes, India achieving a $5 trillion economy by 25, yes, it's a big question mark, especially looking at the growth rates that we've experienced in the last 2 years. In fact, RBI itself has, reduced the growth forecast to around 6% for the next year. And that's not a growth rate that you want to look at if at all we need to kind of touch the 5 trillion mark. But you can definitely see the government's initiatives wanting to increase consumption. If you look at the budget, it was purely focused on increasing consumption, right? The dedicated freight corridors, reduction in corporate taxes, even giving 15% tax rates to new manufacturing units. Extending the tax holidays that are there for startups, the Udan schemes. What all of this is going to do is going to get more money back in the system for people to kind of spend. Even for individuals, if we see the new tax regime, what it's done is it's giving an option to not really go and invest in certain areas which gets reduction. It's giving an option where you can probably come back in the system, spend on consumption, and that's what's going to eventually drive growth. Also, there's a lot of think about companies not investing, slowdown going on around there. But honestly speaking, I mean, if we see, last year India received around $26 billion of investments from VCPs. That's the highest ever that India has received. So yes, I think there are companies still investing in ideas and opportunities which kind of make sense. So yes, I do believe that we are on track to get to the $5 trillion economy, but as Tanisha said, maybe not by 25, maybe a couple of years more.
So sir, do you believe that your expectations have been fulfilled by this year's budget, and is it going to help improve our situation in the economic today?
Personally, no. On a personal level, no. But yes, for companies, definitely. Look at it this way, right? So PEs, VCs, I do more evaluations, again, I'm not an economist, so I kind of look at how deals are happening, what are the multiples and stuff. So for PE VCs, the extension of tax breaks, then they also have given certain, tax benefits when it comes to exercising stock options and stuff. So this is only going to encourage them to invest more money. And what happens is when PE VCs start investing more money, there are obviously different kind of companies coming up. So let's take a scenario of fintech companies, right? What do? They kind of are making funds or other microloans available, microfinance available to small users. That is going to convert to consumption, right? And these investments, again, VCs land up investing in e-commerce companies. What's that going to lead to? That's going to give a platform for smaller and medium enterprises to kind of showcase their products online, their investments in logistic companies that's going to enable these products to be kind of delivered or rather reach the consumers. So yes, I mean that's what your question is, right? Whether the investments.
Yes, true. Thank you so much, sir. So, sir mentioned that last year we got $26 billion investment, and that has been the highest up till now.
Yes.
And in India, we're also promoting a lot of startups to build and establish over here and promote more of investment and everything. So, Tanisha ma'am, how do you think the current economic situation is going to boon that, like encourage a lot of startups to come in?
I think in the sense that even the budget before this one did focus quite a bit on MSMEs, and there's been some relaxation of regulations, etc. So that is good. Even in this budget, the focus that they lay on healthcare will definitely help in some extent with newer age startups that are looking into that. And even just the international political climate right now, especially with the US-China trade deals going on, there is an opening for MSMEs to fill in that market gap that is being created due to protectionism or anything else. So I feel like if we do act soon, because countries like China do have alternate countries that they can approach for most of these goods, if we act soon, there is an opportunity here for smaller businesses to grab.
And we've recently heard a lot about the disease that is coronavirus spreading through China.
Yeah.
So what do you think, how does coronavirus breakout impact Indian imports of raw material from China?
It impacts the imports greatly. I mean, just in Maharashtra, in Aurangabad, which is one of our bigger manufacturing hubs, we have seen a significant negative impact. We are extremely dependent on China for raw materials like pharma ingredients, electronic components, everything from LED bulbs to mobile phones to electronics. Solar energy sector has been affected because of this. Inventories will start running out by end of Feb, which means that by March we should expect a price hike in a lot of these products. That will in turn affect demand, even consumer spending again. But like I said, especially with the trade settlement, there is an opening over here. Even because of coronavirus, had we been prepared, if we were ready to increase production, this was something that Indian companies could have done instead of turning towards Taiwan or Hong Kong that we have to buy parts from that are now 15 to 13% costlier than China's parts used to be. So it's a rather bleak outlook, but I feel like it'll be preparation. We'll be able to reduce our dependency on the Chinese economy, and hopefully this will encourage localization a little bit more.
So at the moment, even I believe that whenever I go to shop something, we're so much engrossed into buying China products at the moment that because of the price has hiked up, we believe that we'll wait for some time कि China के साथ we have the imports again and buy something.
I want to buy a laptop in the middle, and there's a shortage of just laptops right now, so it really does happen.
It has impacted a lot. And so moving on to Vijay sir. Vijay sir,
I'll tell you. I just want to say a couple of things here, Now, what is the current size of Indian economy? Can you tell me? So it's about $2.8, $2.9 trillion. And as both of them have very rightly said that at the current growth rate of 4.5, it will take 9 years to reach 9 trillion economy size, not 5 years. Now what is required is you have to increase the rate. Now if you have been watching cricket or playing cricket, let me just give you an analogy. What is Indian economy and what kind of balls Indian economy is facing? So Indian economy is nothing but a batsman, and they are facing the spin balls. Now what happens, when you face a fast ball? If you have to hit a 4 or a 6, you don't have to apply force. You just have to direct the ball in a manner that it goes to the boundary. But when you face a spin ball, you require 2 skills. How to face it, because it is a very tricky ball. And second is, if you want a 4 and a 6, you have to apply force. So Indian economy currently is in that space. What is required is, the required force is required. and that will take Indian economy beyond the boundary, which is, and what is boundary? 5 trillion. So what is that force is required? Force is required in terms of, so I am a big supporter of deficit financing. Let me give you a little bit of a background here, for example, like let's look at Japan. Japan is facing a zero growth economy for the last so many years. They are doing everything possible on the earth to increase consumption, which is not increasing. Correct? Why it is not increasing? Because of the fact that they have a big problem of population. They have old population, younger people are not there. So, and in Japan, the interest rates are practically zero. You keep your money in the bank, you have to actually pay to the bank. You don't get anything. Because my son lives in Tokyo, he works in Tokyo, so I know it. So what I'm just trying to tell you is that Indian economy that way is very, very robust. You have great potential for consumption. You have great potential for demand. There are a lot of people who are waiting in terms of spending money, but they are not spending for various reasons. So what is required is that you have to go for big bang deficit financing. I'll tell you about 2 years back when the government of India came with a plan for the sovereigning foreign bonds. I was the one person who went vocally against the government move. You can check. So it was published also. I said first, I don't support this. What India needs? India needs huge amount of INR spending, not forex spending. Most of my budget expenditure is INR denominated, rupee denominated. There is no problem in terms of government raising money locally in terms of borrowings, whether it is bonds, tax-free bonds, taxable bonds, short-term bonds, long-term bonds. So if you actually look at, I have identified the sectors where government needs to spend big money in the next few years, even if it is through deficit financing. Because definitely you will not have the corresponding revenue by way of taxes. But in the long term, you will have enough money to pay those debts and taxes. Just to give an example, when you buy a car on EMI or buy a house, what do you think? Do you think that you are going to repay it in 1 year? No. You think about your potential to earn that kind of money in the next 20 years and repay it. When you take an education loan and go to US, you don't expect to pay it in 2 years or 3 years. But you feel that once you are US educated, you will get a salary, maybe you will get a salary of $100,000 or $150,000, and maybe 3 years down the line you can pay that education loan of 50 lakhs, 60 lakhs, 75 lakhs, whatever it is. So that means you are looking at your future potential of earning. Based on that, so why the government is not looking at that? Why government is not going for big bang deficit financing? If you look at the US budget, you will be surprised. If you look at the external debt or the national debt of so many other countries, it is more than their GDP. But they are not bothered about it. Until unless you spend huge amount of money on infrastructure, rural, agriculture, township, small enterprises, medium enterprises, tourism, culture, Indian traditions. These are the areas where see what has happened unfortunately with India. India is moving from agriculture, manufacturing to the service industry. And please understand, service industry is very dangerous. Look at China. Just now she gave that because of coronavirus, not only India, so many other countries are facing problems because lot of raw material is coming from. So China is what? China is a manufacture-based economy. And that is why China is so strong. US is what? Manufacture. What is Japan? Manufacture. What is India? India is becoming a service industry. Why? Why we are leaving our core competence, which was agriculture, manufacture. See, I can tell you with guarantee, unless you increase your share of agriculture and manufacture in the global economy, you cannot become a strong global economy. It is for sure. Today we are dependent upon software, IT. But then this now competition is increasing in IT from so many other countries. And let me tell you, I have high regard for the Indian IT engineers, because both my children are IT engineers. But let me just tell you, they tell me that we are nowhere compared to the people from South Korea, Japanese, even the people from China. So what I'm just trying to tell you is that the moment we are going to face this competition, so what is required is that India has to revisit its agriculture sector. There should be a passion for agriculture. People actually today should shift from towns to the villages and adopt agriculture as a fashion. See what is happening in Brazil and what has happened in Australia, or for that matter so many other countries, Norway and all that. People are into the agriculture profession, they take pride in that. I have traveled and met with the people, they say, I am a farmer. Highly educated person. He introduces himself as a farmer. How many of us will take pride and say, I am a farmer? We'll probably give some fancy name to it. We'll not say farmer. True. So, why this is happening? Why people should take shame in saying that, boss, I am a shop owner? There's nothing wrong in that. Or for that matter, I am a chai wala or I am a pakoda wala. So I'm only trying to say that this is where I think the focus is required. So development of infrastructure, agriculture, social sector, health, education, skill development, and all this requires big money with no immediate returns by way of taxes and any kind of returns. These are investments actually. These are long-term investments. See, for example, tourism. I have done my own computations. Tourism requires about $50 billion in India. India is such a beautiful country. I've been traveling India for the last 3-4 years. Every year I take 2 vacations and I've been traveling to different parts of India. I say that India is the perfect tourism destination. What government needs to do is spend big money on tourism and you can have huge revenues coming in. So even in the service industry, you can have this, and the moment you spend on tourism, you create a lot of direct and indirect employment. So my take of what is required for India to reach to fight, see, it's very clear. Until unless, for example, let's say you want to be a topper. Until unless you are exceptionally intelligent, you cannot afford to be a topper by studying only 2 hours a day. You have to put in some extra effort to be a topper. Now, if you want to be a 5 trillion economy, you cannot be a 5 trillion economy by a budget which is a moderate budget. By moderate spending, you cannot be a 5 trillion economy. I am giving an example, please don't quote it out of this room. The example is of Reliance Jio. Now, how much money Reliance Jio has spent? Can you tell me? I'll tell you, 2,50,000 crores. That is precisely where they could give the best of the 4G services across India. I know that this requires further improvement in terms of service and other things. But now if you wanted 99% of India to be covered, 4G services, you could not do with 20,000 crores or 40,000 crores. It's a half-hearted effort. So Reliance was a debt-free company. Reliance has huge debt on its books, but they know that they are going to pay this debt over a period of time because they have created infrastructure which is going to generate revenue.
So sir, altogether means that India should be a country that is self-sustained, that we manufacture our own products. We see other countries, China, America, Japan. But one thing I think we've learned, that never go to Japan when you're earning. You're not getting interest when you're putting your money in the bank, and instead you have to pay over there, as sir mentioned. And we live in a country where we should take pride in whichever profession we are. Even if we are a chai wala, we are a chai vendor, tea vendor, we can at the end of the day become a prime minister of the country as well, because that can happen. So with a lot of pride we should say that we're doing a lot of things. India should not just be a service sector industry but also manufacture. Reliance Jio, as sir suggested, that has invested so much, although they're currently in a lot of debt, but because of the free service that they provided at the beginning, we all were like, acha, free mila, let's just buy it. Afterwards, we had just 2 SIM cards, like Airtel Jio, Vodafone Jio, and we were in a habit of using GOT free internet mil raha hai. Even though today we don't get kabhi a lot of nice signal, but still we are using it. We're not going to shut it down because Reliance Jio has made us do that. That is how they've entered into the market, and sir is saying the current budget needs to do that. It doesn't require a lot of moderate expenses, but a lot of amount of expenses what is required. Thank you so much, sir. Moving on to Anand, sir. So what do you think? So there was something known as demonetization that was introduced in our country. And I can see a lot of people smiling. Even they had to stand for their families to just get the money exchanged. So was it too soon for the Indian economy to get demonetized?
Well, I don't think it was too soon. Maybe it could have been planned much better. Because see, there was a huge amount of parallel economy going on, and again to bring all the money back in the system, this was a move that had to be taken, I believe. But yes, the way it was planned, a lot of loopholes. Eventually, all the money that kind of came back has been pumped back into the parallel economy. So there have been really no positive impacts apart from we starting to use Paytms and UPI payments. Reduce the use of cash. Most of us, at least all the salary class employees, have kind of moved to cashless economy. But the purpose with which it came out on kind of unearthing black money and getting more people in the tax base, I don't think that has happened the way it was planned. But yes, I don't think there was a better time for that.
So I still remember when demonetization had taken place. I remember Arvind Kejriwal giving a speech that instead of having just 1,000 rupee note nowadays, we're going to have 2,000 rupee notes, so black money to come nahi hone wala hai.
Yeah.
That is what he mentioned. Now sir is saying that it was a good time to do it, but in a better planned way, it could have been a much better idea at that time. Tanisha ma'am, so not being an economist, but just being a normal citizen, active citizen of the country, do you think GST that was introduced in the country was the proper decision that was taken? Like we used to pay a lot of taxes before, VAT, etc., etc. I don't know the names of all the taxes. But
Yeah, there were a lot of taxes, and of course it has. In the long run, it was a good move. In the future, I'm sure it will play out well. But like Mr. Anand said earlier, there was no good time to do either demonetization or GST. But doing GST so closely after demonetization was kicking the economy when it was already down, or kicking a lot of businesses and businessmen when they were already down. And I'm not sure whether that could have had any kind of positive impact. I also don't see why there was a hurry in doing these things. Like he said, were they planned better, they would have played out much better and had a much more positive impact. So I feel like such big government decisions should be better thought out before execution, especially on the scale that they are kind of being implemented on.
I think they were more engrossed into just celebrating of introducing something like this. I remember at 12 o'clock they were pressing the buzzer along with the President of India that, oh my God, we've introduced GST. So they just wanted to celebrate. It should have been planned, I think.
In terms of time, with demonetization, there was the Uttar Pradesh election. That was also, maybe by coincidence, right around the corner. So like he said, there's no good time to do it, but it was maybe a good time in certain other contexts.
So my next question is for Anand sir. The fall of the banking sector is a major red flag at the moment when we look at the economic sector in the country. Where do you think the banks are going wrong? What are the mistakes that they're making at the moment? They've merged recently, we've got increased capital, as sir mentioned, that they're merging because of the increased capital required. So where do you think they're going wrong at the moment?
I think they're probably lending too much capital to a lot of companies. Maybe there's not enough due diligence that has been performed before the lending has happened, and even after the lending has happened, there hasn't really been. I think there's a bit of a failure on the regulatory perspective that they're not really tracking the performances of the loans. And if we see all the NPAs that we hear about now, why suddenly 2 years back you see a lot of banks recording a lot of NPAs? Those should have been identified at much sooner than they have been. and maybe if that would have happened, you wouldn't have had such a big shock of multiple banks reporting multiple NPAs and showing huge losses. So I think they need to kind of be a little more more careful about what kind of projects they are funding, and yes, they need to kind of also make sure that the funds that have been taken are being employed for the right purposes.
And lastly, are we getting in adequate of funding to propel our productions?
Yes, we are. So again, so we work with a lot of Indian multinationals, right? And we haven't heard from them that they're going to reduce their M&A activities. I mean, they continue spending on the right businesses and the right projects. So yes, obviously because of the global slowdown, you're going to see that not a lot of companies are kind of interested in opening up their purses and investing in companies. But yeah, on an overall perspective, there seems to be not really that kind of a slowdown when it comes to money being introduced in the system by at least foreign investors and Indian multinationals.
Thank you so much. So my next question is for Tanisha ma'am. Recently there have been a lot of tension between the US and Iran. And I think, what do you think, has it affected the oil prices in our country, and how is it further going to affect the OPEC?
I think that's a question better directed to Mr. Joshi, but as far as the geopolitics that are involved, from what I understand, in the short and medium run, we won't be facing a shortage of oil because we have enough alternatives in the form of Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, other countries in the Mediterranean. But in the long run, it will affect prices. Crude oil has a weightage of about 10.4% on our WPI, so that could lead to inflation. The government might have to cut taxes on fuel, which would then affect revenue. So it is definitely not something that will work out in our favor in the long run, especially because it's a key material in so many sectors that are already hit, such as automobiles, that it'll just make things worse or harder for recovery.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Joshi sir, if you'd like to answer that question.
If you permit, I would like to just chip in on three things. One is demonetization, another is GST, and the third one is
Oil prices, OPEC.
So one is demonetization. See, I agree that demonetization probably was required because India had parallel economy. But I personally feel that it is wrong to say that cash economy is bad. Black economy is bad. Black money is bad. Cash economy is not bad. I'll give you an example. If you go to many countries, and this I've been writing on international forums also, there are so many countries where still people accept cash. I'll give you another example of Japan. In Japan still, the Japanese are very comfortable only dealing in cash. You cannot use any international debit card in Japan. It doesn't work on any ATMs. In Japan, you will not find any frauds, no cyber frauds, zero. The reason is that people don't use so much like we have in India. So I think this is a misnomer. If I'm dealing in cash, for example, let's say if I'm paying my taxes, I come to you, I say I've got 1 lakh of rupees, I want to buy a laptop. You look at me, boss, this man is paying in cash, that means this chap has got a black money. No, I'm showing you my tax returns, boss, I pay 25 lakhs of tax every year. So what I'm just trying to tell you is that this is a wrong, I think the whole theory behind the demonetization, the whole genesis of demonetization was not there. So far as the timing is concerned, I would say that probably the timing was also not right and it was not planned properly. So what happened in demonetization, as he rightly said, Mr. Anand rightly said that a lot of money has actually come back into the system. Without government, so government expected probably 20-30% money will not come back in the system and that will become a surplus to them. But that never happened. So practically 99% of the money came back into the system. And the government could not collect so much of taxes also. But in the process, a lot of people who were totally on cash business got hurt. So it had a chain reaction on a lot of people in terms of, and that kind of, it's like, it takes time to get revived. And immediately after that came GST, where everyone has to get registered. So GST was the idea of GST. So demonetization, the purpose of demonetization was different. What was shown to the public was different, and the way it was implemented, I think the combination was not right, because of which I don't think demonetization was so successful in that sense. And as you rightly said that even today, or Kejriwal said, I don't want to get into the political things. But the fact is that today, if somebody is saying that cash is not being hoarded or black money is not getting generated, I don't believe it. In Bombay, you go to the Crawford market, even today, even if you do the shopping for 50,000 rupees, nobody accepts credit card or debit card, you have to pay in cash. I have faced it myself. I went for a wedding shopping, I had to go to the ATM, draw cash and give it to him. He simply refused. I said, you charge me 2% extra. I want to pay by debit card and credit card. I don't deal in cash. He said, sorry sir, go to some other shop. And that is after I have selected everything. So what I'm just trying to tell you is that, so the point is that that person may be, trying to do in cash, but so far as I am concerned, I am paying out of my tax-paid income. So demonetization probably could have been done better, in a better manner. The purpose would have been achieved, the economy would not have been hurt. Considering, somebody should have looked that in India, how many people are dealing in cash? So the big deals are still happening in cash today, and the small deals were always happening in cash, and they were not generating any black money. The vegetable vendor, the chai wala, or the small shops and other things, they got badly hurt. The daily earners and all those got hurt. Now, second point is the GST. GST is a good idea. In so many countries, there are only one tax. So in India, there were so many taxes, and I being a chartered accountant was dealing with taxes, I know that there were a lot of complexities in terms of dealing with so many taxes. So it was a good idea. GST was introduced about so many years back. Vijay Kelkar committee, I remember, I was part of that when I was in Delhi. So I know that this idea has been going around when VAT was introduced, So VAT was almost like, only one tax will be there, but still with VAT, so many taxes continue. So with GST, the good thing that they have done is they have merged so many taxes in GST, so you have to only monitor one. But here again, the way this has come and the way this has been quickly, this has been implemented, and there are not enough safeguards, because of which still I think there is a lot of leakage of taxes, and that is where, government is still struggling with their own internal target of GST collections. Because of which there is a lot of, unethical practices in terms of putting pressure on large corporates, huge demands, unjustified. There are a lot of things that are happening under the GST. So I think the idea is good, the concept is good, but probably this could have been, and there was no harm if it was implemented in phases. What happened with VAT? VAT was a state tax, right? Unlike GST. VAT was, the states were allowed. Every state did not implement the VAT straight away. The first state to implement VAT was Haryana, if I remember. And after that, some states, so some of the states took almost 1 year to implement VAT. So similarly in GST, probably they should have done in a different manner. And after the implementation of GST, there have been so many changes in the GST rates, so many GST council meetings, exemptions. So, there have been U-turns. So that means the whole process was not conceptualized properly. In fact, if you read the GST law, I don't know, but I don't find it is a very good law in terms of reading, If you read the British tax law, trust me, I'm telling you, if you read it thoroughly, 5 days, you will understand. GST, if you read, and after 5 days you read again, you will get more confused. If you read more, you will get more confused. So, and now they are thinking in terms of doing a lot of simplifications and a lot of other things. So, what I'm just trying to say is that the idea, the concept is good, probably the implementation was done in a hurried manner, and considering the size of the Indian economy and the size of India as a country, probably these things require implementation in stages, so that it gets its desired result, and the side effects are also, it's like, you put a patient on too many antibiotics at the same time, the poor fellow will have so many side effects. Rather than doing good, it's going to do harm on him. So this is exactly, 2 antibiotic doses in succession, demonetization, and then GST, and the poor fellow, the economy is having the side effects.
So at the end of the day, what we learned from this is that being such a huge economic country and having such a huge population, everything needs to go in steps. It should be implemented, not in a hurry. And with that, I think we come.
So I'll just come to the last point, the crude oil. So let me. That's very important. So let me just give you a little perspective. My view is that I think we should not get worried because of, as she very rightly said, that there are so many other sources of supply. So we should not get worried because of US influencing or trying to have strained relations with Iran or Iraq or things like that. Another good thing that is happening is that the whole energy basket is changing. This is a little complex, let me just tell you. Today, the energy basket has about 6.5% of gas consumption, and the government is planning to increase it to 15%. That means the dependence on crude oil will decrease. Plus, we are also looking at alternate energy, solar power, wind power, solar, and so many others, right? So what is happening is that over a period of time, India's dependence on import of crude oil is going to decrease. The way the gas prices have gone down, I think many of you are not aware, have gone down below $3 per MMBTU, which is probably the lowest in India at any point of time, right? So I personally feel that India is going to get benefited because India is a net importer of energy, and these geopolitical things will have some kind of a short-term spikes. Like, the price may go up, but on the long term, if you ask me, I don't see crude oil prices going above 60. In fact, on a weighted average basis, I see a price of $50 per barrel, gas around $5 to $6, which is very good for the Indian economy, and for us, the price at the consumer level are going to be very, very stable. I don't see any threat on this, and on this I think the government of India is doing a wonderful job in maintaining very good relations with the international oil producing countries so that they are not dependent on one particular source, and if anything happens to that source, it is not going to adversely affect us.
As ma'am mentioned, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, we have a lot of other sources as well.
Yes.
And in the country and in a lot of states as well, we are moving to other sources of energy.
So
like
I want to give a message to the younger generation. See, I tell you, as I said, I'm optimistic. I want you all to be optimistic. See, I think you all are Indian, we all are Indians. Our Indian economy is a very robust economy. I think there's a lot of slowdown and a lot of talk about Indian economy going down and other things. I think there is little bit worry, but at the same time, there is nothing which should get alarmed in terms of getting scared or in terms of panicking. The Indian economy is going to grow in multiples, I'm telling you. Take my words. Probably if we meet after 3 years, we'll discuss on this. You will see a quantum jump in Indian economy from here. It is at a stage where it is preparing the ground to take off. Once the Indian economy takes off, there is no stopping to Indian economy. The only thing is they have to make their manufacturing and agriculture sectors strong. They cannot be dependent just on service economy. So once they have done it, I'm telling you the Indian economy is going to take off, and probably we are now fifth. The recent study says we are fifth in terms of the global economy. We have come to the fifth place. I think in 2 years, 3 years time, we could come to place number 3. So we could be after US, China. We can't beat US. Let's be honest about it. Unless we start making big weapons, big computers, and big aeroplanes. So US, China, because China still continues to be as she rightly, one very important point she mentioned. Actually, coronavirus was a good opportunity for us to capitalize. But why we could not capitalize? Because we do not have the manufacturing facility available with us. Otherwise, we could have produced. What happens, generally in the competition, if the competitor is down, the other person immediately takes advantage of that.
Yes,
but unfortunately, India could not do that because we don't have manufacturing capability and facility in place. Otherwise, what China is producing, tell me what is that India cannot produce? India can produce all those things. Better quality. But you cannot produce in the air. You require some manufacturing facility to be in place. You can scale up and then start producing.
So currently,
that is where we have, and that is why we have not been. So I think coronavirus is a simple learning, eye-opening for us that we must have to increase our manufacturing capabilities and capacities so that if we face this kind of a situation, and actually we should not be import dependent, we should be export surplus. So this I think so in two to 3 years time, if the budget moves in the right direction and government does some big spending in terms of where it is required, I think the Indian economy will multiply, not add.
So currently it's just that we are taking a step behind so that we can take 3 steps ahead in a few years.
Yes.
And with our whole motive to discuss this, that will India be a 5 trillion billion economy by 2025? As our 3 panelists mentioned, if not in 5 years, I think in 9 years of time we might be able to do that. With that, I come to an end with the panel discussion. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. In order to felicitate our panel members, I would like to call upon the curator of Literature and Freedom, Mukhtar Jain. Let's begin with Anand, sir. If you could join us ahead for the felicitation. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a huge round of applause for Anand, sir? Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much. I request you to please be seated, everyone. Please be seated. After the panel discussion, we have a few speakers who would like to say a few things. So please be seated. Moving on, we have Tanisha ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing your precious time. Thank you so much. And lastly, Vijay sir. I think today we got a lot of knowledge apart from our textbooks, and what we take from this panel discussion is like India should be a country which manufactures and taps the opportunities just like other countries, just like corporate sector does, and we will be a big economy in a few years, like sir mentioned, in the 3rd position. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am.